Hello and welcome to Woke Watch, an ongoing series of videos where I find woke stories from the internet and together we can deconstruct them to expose wokeness for the nonsense it truly is. And here in the UK there's a story about a particularly woke newspaper turning on itself. If you're from Britain you'll know the publication, the far left apologise for everything temple of wokeness, The Guardian. The paper recently released a statement saying it will pay £10 million in reparations to pay for restorative justice because of the paper's historical links to crimes against humanity. So this is a big issue. Well, the issue itself is that this extremely woke paper was founded by a man with links to the slave trade. When the slave trade is mentioned, most people will think of the transatlantic slave trade, a truly horrible chapter in humanity's history. But of course, slavery has gone on for as long as there have been people. The word slave is derived from the word Slav, and slavery was a practice of Muslims abducting Eastern Europeans to sell them. And it's gone on for much longer than that, because unless you're a tinfoil weirdo who thinks the pyramids were made by aliens, well, it wasn't the Egyptians doing the lifting. And sadly, in the 21st century, there are now more people in slavery than at any other time. John Edward Taylor founded The Guardian in 1821. But, and it's an important but, slavery had been abolished in Great Britain in 1807. It was gone from the entire empire by 1833. So how did he employ slaves given that slavery was already illegal? Well, this is why this story is so bloody woke. He fucking didn't. As well as being a journalist, Taylor was also a cotton trader, and he bought cotton which had been imported from America, most of which had been grown on cotton plantations which employed slave labour, because in the USA at that time, slavery was still legal. So this is a man who bought a commodity from a country with different rules and regulations. That's it. Now, back in 2020, the statue of the slave trader Edward Colston was toppled into Bristol docks. Whether that was the right or the wrong way to get rid of that statue is open to debate. In my opinion, having hundreds of people meeting up in close proximity at the start of the pandemic to commit an act of basically public vandalism, not the way to go about it. But the ugly truth is, whether we like it or not, everyone in the Western world has benefited from slavery. Because if we stay in Bristol, yes, Colston was a slave trader, but he was also a philanthropist. Now that doesn't cancel out him being an evil bastard who profited from the misery of others. But it was his money from the slave trade that built hospitals, schools, churches, public houses and housing. So to this day, Bristolians are still benefiting from the slave trade. That doesn't mean what went on was in any way acceptable, but it gives it some context. And as for John Taylor's business dealings, most of the towns and cities in the north of England were built off the back of the cotton trade. So what do we do now? Just because some overly offended woke bastard from The Guardian feels guilty for something which he, she or they, them had nothing to do with, tomorrow do I have to drive up to Manchester and bulldoze the fucking city? Thus the crime for which The Guardian are going to shell out £10 million is that its founder bought materials from a country with different values and standards to his own. And that's without taking into context, it was 200 years ago. But woke people, they look at everything through the modern lens because they are fucking stupid. But if we apply that modern lens to what we do today, haven't we all bought things which we shouldn't? We all have a fair amount of tat that was made in China, and I'm not saying the Chinese are using slave labour, but do we honestly believe the pay and conditions in Chinese factories and sweatshops would be acceptable in the Western world? Of course not. That's why it's all so fucking cheap. And if you bought clothes from Thailand or Bangladesh, again, it won't be slave labour, but there's a fucking good chance it employed child labour, which is almost as bad. And of course the device you're watching this on now, your tablet or smartphone, the metals in that battery, the mining process most likely involved child labour. And I'm not exempt because I'm using mine now. The whole story begs the question, This £10 million to be paid out in restorative justice, who's it going to go to? Because I'm fairly certain that anyone who was working on a cotton plantation 200 years ago will have no need for money, wherever the money goes. My guess is the main effect will be the upper middle class white people who work at The Guardian will add a tiny bit to their white saviour complex and lose a tiny bit of white guilt. And then the upper middle class white people who read the fucking Guardian will see their beloved paper has done the right thing and everything will be okay. And then over the next few years, the name of John Edward Taylor will quietly be erased from history and wokeness will be restored. The issues of the white saviour complex and the very woke white guilt, they elude me for good reason. Because even though different races have done terrible things to other races throughout history, I, nor anyone else, is responsible for those who went before us. We can't control the actions of our ancestors, we can only control our current actions and try to grow and be better people. Because I've checked, I've been through my receipts, I've checked my history on eBay and Amazon, and I can say conclusively, I have never bought, sold or owned another human being. And the daft thing is, the silly woke bastards who cry about everything, they haven't either. And I'll end this video on a very, very cynical point. £10 million is a huge amount of money. But The Guardian is worth 1.3 billion, they won't even feel it. As ever, thanks for watching.